Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp. Inc., MGI on the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected high-grade gold, including 16.9 meters of 13.58 grams and 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. A follow-up drill program is planned to further evaluate previously identified subsurface high-grade gold mineralization. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he's worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thanks for having me back on. Always a pleasure to be here.
Tariff wars, how are they hitting the Asian markets?
Well, we can see this in glimpses in certain key industries. As people may or may not know, China has become a solar panel monster, a gigantic force in the market, with as much as 70% of the world's solar panel production now taking place in China. And it seems that it is being particularly hit hard. That industry is being particularly hit hard right now because, of course, of the tariffs that are being raised. I believe 30% tariffs on Chinese solar panel imports into the U.S. as a result of these brewing trade wars. But also because at the exact same time, Beijing, which has been heavily subsidizing the Chinese solar panel market, is stepping back from that subsidization and reducing the feed-in tariff rate in China specifically, because they are actually way ahead of the game in terms of what they wanted to produce in terms of solar power. They're apparently producing 130 gigawatts by the end of 2017, and they were on track. They were supposed to reach 110 by 2020. So they already have literally too much solar power in China. A lot of it's going to waste because the infrastructure isn't developed yet to actually carry it. So at the same time as the Chinese government is reducing their incentives for solar panel manufacturers, now they're being hit by these U.S. tariffs. So we can see, for example, in that industry in particular, there's some big things going on, and not for the benefit of the Chinese manufacturers. But we see in other places, we see I suppose the art of the deal is taking place, or it seems to be. The latest news being that the U.S. and the EU are engaged in negotiations to avoid a trade war and lower levies. And the latest news that I've seen is that apparently Trump is signaling that maybe they might hold off on the auto tariffs that they were talking about with the EU. So it looks like there's some deals going on here, and trade war, all-out trade war, every nation for itself might be avoided, but it looks like the China trade war is still on.
Sure, and the U.S. has just slapped tariffs on solar panels made in Canada. Trump really seems to hate Canada a lot.
Very perplexing, isn't it? But as his supporters will tell you, it's all art of the deal, and they're just trying to get something for the American worker. Well, we'll definitely see how that works out, but it's not making Canadians happy.
Well, Trump Tower in Toronto closed. Apparently not enough business.
Got to tell you something.
Asian stocks, are they being hit, and are emerging markets poised to take advantage of these tariff wars amongst the major countries?
Well, I think for developing markets, the big question is the dollar and what's going to happen with the dollar, because, of course, as the Fed raises rates and the dollar strengthens, that's going to be problems for a lot of these developing markets where they were offering dollar-denominated bonds of various sorts. And that has been part of the big boom in developing markets in recent years, but that could all unwind as the Fed continues to raise rates, although we've, of course, seen Trump tweeting recently at the Federal Reserve, basically angry at the raising rates. So we'll see how that all plays out, but if things continue, it looks like a lot of the development in the developing markets is going to unwind. Specifically here in Japan, when we're looking at the markets, of course, as I've mentioned before, we are looking essentially at the Bank of Japan, which, as I've talked about before, has become a top 10 shareholder in 40% of the companies listed on the Nikkei 225 index. Because the Bank of Japan is just plowing money into ETFs, exchange-traded funds, that are themselves buying Nikkei stocks on the Nikkei average. And that is essentially driving the market here. And this is, of course, a catch-22. It's the painting themselves into a corner, because how do you unwind that stimulus at the same time as you're trying to reach your magical 2% inflation rate? Something's got to give. And although it seems that all indications are that at the next Bank of Japan meeting, they're going to continue and hold course for plowing another 6 trillion yen into ETFs this year. That's $54 billion US dollars. But they might change the composition of that ETF purchase. Instead of buying Nikkei stock average weighted funds, they might be looking at the broader Topix index, so that the stimulus might reach kind of a broader segment of Japanese markets. But still, Japanese markets are being heavily driven by the Bank of Japan and the Bank of Japan's easing and stimulus. So I think that does not bode well for the future of Japan Inc., because, again, this is a policy that it's really impossible to see a way out of gracefully.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of PowerBand Solutions. PowerBand is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. PowerBand Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWBF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, what's happening in the Chinese real estate market? Has it slowed down? Is it becoming less valuable, or is it still booming away?
Well, that's interesting because it depends on what side of the market you're looking on. In terms of real estate investment from China, and in this case, I think we're talking specifically about international real estate investment, we are seeing a downturn. And in fact, in the second quarter of 2018, Chinese real estate investors sold $1.29 billion worth of property, but only purchased $126 million worth of property. So there is a sell-off going on right now. They're unwinding some of their purchases. We can see the real estate investment is cooling off, but the housing market in China, it continues its record upswing. In fact, we've just entered 37 straight months of rising real estate market in China. This started back in, I believe, June of 2015 and has been rising ever since. And they measure it, the Chinese National Statistic Bureau, take it for what it's worth, but they measure this in terms of commercial housing sales area. So the area of commercial housing that has been sold in the first half of this year was 771 million square meters, which is an increase of 3.3% from the previous year. The total amount of commercial housing sales in China reached 6,694.5 billion yuan, which is about $1,000.59 billion, aka a trillion. That seems exceptionally too high. But at any rate, that's the numbers that are being reported, and that is an increase of 13.2% from the previous reporting. So again, the Chinese housing market internally continues its boom, but it looks like Chinese real estate investment is on a downturn at the moment, although they do expect that to pick up towards the end of the year. But there is a change in the flavor of that international real estate investment going on. I've just noted that the Financial Post is reporting that move over Toronto and Vancouver, Montreal is the new hot housing market for Chinese real estate shoppers, and they're talking about how interest in Montreal grew by 84.5% in 2017 and 43.3% a year earlier. So it looks like Montreal might be about to catch fire in the way that Toronto and Vancouver have in years past.
Montreal doesn't have a foreign buyer tax, I think.
That would be a significant contributor to that growth, wouldn't it?
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Vatic Ventures Corp. is a potash exploration company focused on the Korat Basin in Thailand, the world's largest undeveloped potash resource. Vatic's management has extensive potash exploration and development experience in Thailand. Vatic will have marketing advantage compared to Western producers. Drill program commences this spring. Vatic trades on the TSX Venture, symbol VCV, and on Frankfurt, symbol V8V2. Visit our website, vaticventures.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, China is being rocked by a huge vaccine scandal. Can you tell us about it and its future implications?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you about the details. I have seen the headlines, but I haven't delved into this story. But I do know, obviously, made in China can be seen as something of a warning label given the Chinese manufacturing process and standards and regulations and what have you. There's often very toxic chemicals and things that are getting implanted into Chinese manufactured products. So it would not surprise me in the least if the same scandal is essentially emerging in the vaccine industry. But as I say, I haven't looked at the details of this story, so I can't really comment on the specifics of it.
Might be like the baby formula that was tainted and killed thousands of babies. Yeah, melamine.
Yes.
Because I know China was hoping to become a huge pharmaceutical producer for the world, but if you can't trust the stuff that's even used domestically, how can you trust it internationally?
Yes, and if you read the works of the high-ranking person in the Trump administration at the moment, whose name is going to escape my mind, but he wrote about the coming China wars and things of that sort. And if you read his books, you will find a lot of information about some of those hazardous and toxic products. I certainly have my reservations about the overall thrust of books like that, but they do contain a lot of information about the manufacturing that I think is genuinely worrying. And as you point out, things like baby formula being tainted with melamine so that when they're tested for protein, it looks like everything's okay. But of course, it's just the underlying chemical, which is highly toxic, that is underneath. And the thought of someone deliberately tainting baby formula with a toxic chemical just to pass certain tests and make sure that the product gets on the market is horrific, but it does go on. And of course, not just in China. Of course, we know about Bayer and its scandal with the HIV tainted vaccines that they were giving out in the 80s that they then were prohibited from selling in the United States, so they ended up selling it to foreign markets in Asia and Africa and elsewhere. I mean, this type of thing goes on worldwide, but I think China is particularly known for it.
How violent has been the run-up to Pakistan's elections?
Again, I can't comment on that in any particular detail. I haven't been following it. I know that Pakistani politics is turbulent in the best of times, so it certainly does seem that there's a lot of turmoil going on at the moment, but again, I haven't really been following that story in any detail.
Yeah, I do recall a Canadian press headline some years ago that said Pakistan's elections were relatively peaceful this year, only 400 killed.
Yeah, that about sums it up. And of course, we've seen the assassination of Benazir Bhutto and other things on the campaign trail in years past, so these types of things do go on in Pakistani elections.
Are tech stocks expected to go to have a lot of trouble now that Facebook is expecting a 24% revenue drop?
Well, that obviously cannot be some hopeful sign for investors. I think that absolutely the tech stocks are going to take a hit. The real question is how big and how long, and whether this is the sign of the times writing on the wall or whether this is just a blip. But certainly the latest that I've seen, yes, Facebook's stock tumbled 24% in after-hours trading on Wednesday. So they're already taking a beating, and that is inevitably going to knock onto the other so-called FANG stocks, the Amazon and Apple and Google and what have you. So again, I think tech stocks can't really avoid taking the hit. It's a question of how much, how deep, and how long. But this is not for investors, that's obviously a bad thing, but for the general public, this may not be such a bad thing, given what's been coming out about companies like Facebook and other companies that are selling people's data and privacy behind the scenes and things like that.
The fine that Facebook paid for violating privacy laws in Europe was so little that in 5.5 minutes they had made back that money.
Business as usual.
Yes.
And of course, we've seen that in a lot of different industries. The banking industry, for example, famous for a lot of these banks being found in huge scandals and signing people up for things they didn't sign up for and what have you, and then they get essentially a slap on the wrist.
Is Vietnam the next hot place in Asia to start a business?
Yes, there has been a lot of talk about that. Vietnam is taking off in a lot of different ways, which should be somewhat surprising, or at least interesting, for people who still think of Vietnam in the old Chinese communist model, or the Vietnamese communist model. But it has definitely been opening to outside business for a number of years now, and that seems to be taking off in a number of different areas. There's people talking about even agricultural opportunities, but apparently the latest that I've seen, European businesses in Vietnam are now reporting a rising Eurocham Business Climate Index, which is talking about the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, which is going to come into effect in 2019, hot on the heels of the EU-Japan Free Trade Agreement, which was just signed earlier this month, I believe, by Prime Minister Abe. So yes, it looks like Vietnam is really making a concerted effort to open up and become more of a business center for Asia, and it's very possible it might be the next wave after we've seen, of course, countries like Japan and then Korea and Singapore and places like that become hot business areas, trading areas in Asia. Well, it could be Vietnam might be next on that list.
For years, China avoided global conflicts. Has that changed?
It is changing. That might be somewhat not something of their own choice per se. It just comes part and parcel with becoming more of a player economically speaking and a bigger player on the geopolitical stage. It's going to mean there is the greater possibility of conflict. So I don't think necessarily Beijing is looking to start conflicts or get engaged in conflicts, but it's going to happen more and more in the coming years. And we have seen that reflected in President for Life, Xi Jinping's recent declarations about restructuring the military and some interesting reports that have been coming out of the Chinese state-run propaganda media talking about the military complaining of quote-unquote peace disease and saying that they're going to have to prepare for a war with the United States so that they can avoid a war with the United States. This type of rhetoric, which we've certainly seen before in the Western world, the Cold War type of mentality of, well, we have to have as many nukes as possible so that they don't nuke us, I think is essentially what they're going for here. But, of course, that means an expanding Chinese military and an expanding Chinese military presence. And that has manifested itself first and foremost in the South China Sea disputes, but I think we're going to start seeing that move into other areas, including, of course, in China's recently christened and first foreign naval base in Djibouti and other strategic locations like that along their African supply routes.
Do you know anything about China's plan to build the first Hyperloop track in the world in Guizhou province? I don't know if I'm saying it right, but...
Yes. No, I don't know a lot of details about that. I have heard about this project, obviously, and it is interesting that China is pressing ahead with this, and it looks like from the latest that's being reported from the U.S. media, anyway, it seems that an L.A. Hyperloop company is landing one of the first big deals to work with China on this project. But at any rate, it's interesting this is happening, and it's a sign, I think, of the overall trend of investment in infrastructure, which, of course, has been one of the key parts of the last several years of the Chinese boom, when it transitioned from just sheer manufacturing boom into the credit boom of the last several years. A lot of that has gone into infrastructure, and of course, most famously, the ghost cities and what have you, but also things like maintaining and developing airports and other types of transportation infrastructure. This will be part and parcel of that, and it's interesting to see, isn't it, when you go to some of these American airports that are falling apart, and then you land in one of these new Chinese airports. It really does look like China is surpassing the U.S. economy, not only in just airy-fairy GDP type numbers, but also in terms of the actual money that they're plowing into their infrastructure.
And, of course, every year the Chinese Lunar New Year sees the biggest movement of people on Earth, something like 800 million, try to find a way to see their relatives for the New Year. They really do need more transportation, and these basically humans in vacuum tubes zipping around could be a way to help out.
It could be long term. I'm not expecting. I would imagine that the first users of this type of Hyperloop technology would probably be not be your average, peasant manufacturing worker who's trying to go back to the rural fields where they came from to visit their parents, kind of thing. I imagine this is going to be more of a business type thing at first. But I suppose the long term plan would be to expand this out so that the average person could actually make use of this technology.
And on our irony file, we have China donating $20 million in election-related equipment to Cambodia. Do you find that kind of interesting?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly telling, isn't it? And I think actually that's part and parcel of what we were just talking about. As China expands on the economic stage, of course, it also has to expand geopolitically. And we've seen that through this One Belt, One Road initiative of developing the infrastructure, the trading infrastructure throughout Central Asia and ultimately into Europe. I think part and parcel of that is going to be things like this, which may just be optics, but at any rate are important when you become more of a geopolitical player. You have to at least be seen to do things like this, supporting democracy in other countries, never mind your own country. And as you noted just before we started talking here, apparently Japan has donated $7.5 million of ballot boxes. I'm just looking at the headline here, and apparently Japan has donated 10,000 ballot boxes for Cambodia's 2018 election, worth $7.5 million. Those are some pretty expensive ballot boxes, but not as expensive as the Chinese ones.
Is democracy brand new to Cambodia?
Cambodia does not have a very long or proud history of democracy. Obviously, it's still emerging from its checkered past, and we'll have to see what really develops from this. I don't think people are expecting this to be the most free, fair, and open election that the world has ever seen, but it may be a step in the right direction, potentially.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.